were played like a cheap kazoo this entire time. This thing right here, that's not the light element. Actually, that's not an elemental power at all. In fact, this is what separates a traveler from their twin. This is what makes them a descender, and it is this power that will allow them to reweave fate itself. It's reason. Now, I know what you're thinking, you are probably feeling skeptical. After all, the light element theory is one of the oldest and soundest theories in the lore community. It just makes sense. The Elemental Specialist 1 name card has been in game since 1.0, and it seems to be lacking 5 whole elements, with light being most likely one of them. On top of that, we have light sigils and economia, and the Traveler claims that they are recovering their power by acquiring the 7 Tevatian elements, which seems to imply that they had mastery over them sometime in the past. And don't forget that Conria used azozite, pure elemental energy, likely a combination of the 7 elements we know, to power their machinery. Its color is not only similar to the Traveler's power, but the machines it feeds are able to utilize attacks that are very similar to theirs as well. So, to say that the Traveler wields the light element seems like a well-educated guess, but also an impossible one. If the light element is a combination of all other 7, then the Traveler should not be able to utilize it again until they reach Snezhnaya and receive power over Cryo. But they do. They have done so over and over again. The fight against Osiel when they made the Jade Chamber plummet from the sky? Check. Oh, but that was just Adepti's power, you might argue. Fine. How do you explain them being able to use it against A in the plane of Euthymia then? Just the visions doing their thing? Okay. What about the fight against Shoki no Kami? And no, Nahid had not yet used the wisdom of the people to help the Traveler at that point, despite them already being stuck in a dream samsara. And yet here they are, conjuring up that same golden energy and actually managing to make a dent in an artificial god because of it. Whether they are channeling it into the palm of their hand, their entire body, or just their sword, the similarities are undeniable. I didn't know what to make of this apparent inconsistency for the longest time. How do you reconciliate them having access to this power so early in the story with the concept of the light element? Well, you don't. And you don't need to, because there is actually another cutscene where they wield this exact same power, during their fight with Narcissencrus. The holy blade shone with the golden energy of reason to dispel Rene's delusions. But it's not the sword itself that is powerful. Narcissencrus said himself that the holy blade could be literally anything capable of holding reason, including a gold-haired traveler. After that battle, having completed its purpose, the sword lost its reason, simply becoming the Sword of Narcissencrus. However, its description reads, "A sword whose power faded when the story ended. It will now embark upon a new journey with the power that remains within it, which commemorates a certain great dream." To say that its power has faded but remains within it is a huge contradiction. But the thing is, this blade has never been anything more than a simple vessel, and I believe that it continues to be so. The power that it still retains is the Traveler's, flowing through their weapon. Which is probably why the Sword of Narcissencrus actually responds to the arc of its wielder. It's like an extension of their body, if you will, a vessel of one's power. The only reason the Holy Blade was ever a sword is because it was thematically appropriate. All evil dragons must be slain by a brave knight, and all brave knights must wield a magnificent sword, just like the description of the Sword of Ascension states. But really, when one is faced with such a final fate, when up against a star-devouring darkness, what weapon would be fitting for one to wield? It can only be a sword. If nothing else, it shall bear the memory of those who face their ends without fear. Now, the interesting thing about the Sword of Ascension is that, just like the name implies, it does not belong to Tevat and it can only be wielded by a Descender. After all, only one who has challenged the world may wield such a sword, which is referring to a Descender's will and its ability to rival an entire world. This will is reason. Narcissencrus calls the Traveler the witness of all, the recorder of all, the designer of all. This echoes Zhongli's words perfectly, as he claims that the Traveler is a witness because they can experience the history of Teyvat without having their perspective distorted and muddled by any changes made by Irminsul. Meanwhile, them being called a designer of all means they have the power to create, at the godlike level I'd say, and the Descender's will can create an entire world. So yeah, from this follows that the Descender's will, their true power, is reason. It's not only that they can hold reason and be a vessel for it, this is a power that is intrinsic to them, which is why we have seen them wield it over and over again despite them not having all 7 elements. Still, I don't think any of you will disagree that the Traveler can wield reason, or will be too opposed to the idea that will and reason might be one and the same. What I'm trying to prove here, though, is that this golden power has been reason all along, because the light element and reason don't negate each other. Them being able to use it does not mean that they have been using it this entire time. So to prove this, let me ask you a question. Why did the Traveler only utilize the special golden attack of theirs once the battle was pretty much decided and their twin had already been imprisoned? And why didn't the twin use it? The jewels in the outfits of the two were all shining with the original white color at that point, so if this golden energy was their original power, both of them should be able to use it. Even if this was the ace they kept up their sleeve, this battle really was not the time or place for them to be keeping their cards close to their chests. They were trying to leave, it's not like they would see the Sustainer again anyway. But most importantly, even though neither twin recognized the god, upon hearing her title, the Abyss twin should have known to go all out to escape. I can even make excuses for the Traveler. They had probably just woken up. In fact, the beta version of the opening cutscene has the Traveler waking up to the sight of their twin already being impaled by the Sustainer. The Genshin beta had no chill, I tell you. They were likely confused, so I wouldn't fault them for being a little slow on the uptake at that moment. But it was the Abyss twin that never used the power to begin with, and it makes no sense. Except that the twin isn't a Descender. If that attack was reason, and if reason is a Descender's will, the twin wouldn't be able to utilize it. It wouldn't be possible at all. Furthermore, the Traveler, who very much is a Descender, was not familiar with the concept until Nahida introduced it to them, which means that this Descender status is likely limited to Teyvat, just another quirk of this world's unique rules. Catter once said that belief is a powerful will and magic shapes reality to one's will. They made it confusing on purpose, but worry not, let us use an analogy. And in honor of the recent event, let us use the musket analogy. Let's say that you are a musket. You have the potential to cause some serious damage, and you can even imagine that damage, but on your own you are pretty much harmless. In order to actually do anything, you need ammunition. Your ammo is your power, so this could be elemental power stemming from a vision, for example. But even your ammo can't do anything on its own, because, like René said, it lacks any will whatsoever. That will is your trigger. So, as the musket, you possess magic, your ammo, and you also possess desires and ambitions, your will. You can use those desires to trigger your magic to shape reality. Shots fired. We have seen vision wielders bending the rules quite often, creating new things where previously that was nothing, deconstructing their entire body and turning it into their element only to regain their form without any struggle or even teleporting. This is probably precisely why there are so few vision wielders despite Celestia benefiting from having them. Because elemental energy lacks a will and is pretty stable on its own, so they need individuals with strong ambitions, strong wills, to be able to weaponize this energy. I mean, think of slimes. They are made of elemental energy, but they can't do much other than exist. They are an inactive form of elemental energy, because they lack a will. A will is a desire, an intention, an ambition. The Traveler didn't use that power before because they were likely not aware that they possessed it, since they had spent all of their time in Teyvat up until that point being asleep. Presumably. However, seeing their sibling get trapped, they experienced the intense desire to free them, and so their will manifested as a powerful attack meant to do just that. Kazuha probably paralleled this exact moment when he blocked the Shogun's attack. It was a sudden desire to stop her and prevent another friend of his from dying the same tragic death that made his Electrovision spark to life. And once that desire was fulfilled, the masterless vision returned to its dormant state. By that same logic, the Traveler isn't capable of utilizing reason at all times because they don't always have the needed desire, the needed ambition to use it. Which might be why Yaemiko claims that the reason they don't have a vision isn't because they can't have one, but because they don't yet have the necessary ambition. And now is a good time to ask why? Why is the Traveler the sender and not the twin then? In order to answer all of that, let's talk about reason and its counterpart, delusion. Have you ever noticed that everyone seems to perceive Tevat in vastly different ways? And what is truly bonkers is that Tevat appears to bend itself over backwards to ensure it affects them exactly how they expect to be affected, the senders or not. For instance, the Tower of Gestalt was absolutely massive, and it only sank beneath the waves either during the whole prophecy ordeal or after it was resolved, depending on when you played the world quest. It's not some old forgotten ruin, it was just smack dab in the middle of the landscape. And yet the NPCs acted as though it never existed at all. In fact, the entirety of the Ordo is so removed from the main questline despite intertwining so deeply with it, that as far as anyone is concerned, it seems to never have existed. But it's not just the NPCs that are affected. Our dear Traveler also comments on the different phases of the moon. Of this moon. You know, the one that is always full? I don't think they see the exact same thing we as players do. And you know who else doesn't? Canotilla. Melusine see things in a very peculiar way by default, but Canotilla bumps it up a notch. Where the Traveler saw only a dangerous ruin and a rift wolf, Canotilla saw a flower field and a puppy. And sure enough, she was able to waltz through the place as safely as if it were actually a flower field. The Traveler wasn't quite so lucky. Still, that didn't take place in the real world. But Paimon lives in the real Tevat and is affected differently from everyone else all the time. She's often theorized to be connected to or be Istaroth because of her ability to stop time and keep moving while everyone else freezes in place, and her ability to skip time. Thing is, she does no such thing. If she were to pause time, all the world around her would become static, but the wind never stops blowing. Instead, I think Paimon simply flows through time much faster than anyone else. The other characters appear frozen in time because she's simply moving too fast in relation to them. This would explain her separation anxiety. During the last Lantern rites, the Traveler stepped outside the restaurant with Zhao for only a couple of minutes, but once they returned, Paimon was absolutely frantic, claiming that they had been away forever. From her point of view, they might as well have been. Paimon never actually skips time either. When you want to move time forward, you still have to wait it out. It simply goes by much faster. And during that time, even Paimon freezes. Imagine that you are driving on the road and on the lane right next to you there is another car traveling at your exact speed. From your point of view, it would look like the car isn't moving, because its distance relative to you remains unchanged. I believe that Paimon is actually influencing time so that the Traveler will flow through it at her own speed, hence why they both appear frozen to us players. It appears that everyone in Tevat is experiencing a slightly or not so slightly different reality depending on their beliefs. And I know this sounds insane. I thought I was insane for the longest time, but after the recent Thelxie event, I know this is a very deliberate choice made by the writers. In that event, Azuria believed so firmly that her deceased son was Thelxie that she could actually see him and hear him when she talked to the mechanical penguin. She was sick with loneliness syndrome, so it would be easy to dismiss this as a hallucination caused by the disease, if it were not for the fact that the Traveler could also see and hear the child. Ghosts exist in Genshin. We have seen them plenty of times. Everyone has seen them. You don't need any special ability to perceive them. But no one could see little Lescaut other than his mother and the Traveler once they put on Fremine's helmet. Chemine himself and Paimon didn't see anything, and neither did the traveler before donning that helmet. It was the helmet that allowed them to see what Zuria saw, and that's because Chemine truly deeply believes that the imaginary worlds people see in their heads are real somewhere, and that his helmet functions as a sort of portal that allows him to enter his imaginary safe space. He believed that so much that he actually gave his helmet the power to perceive these imaginary worlds. And that's because Chemine may not be a descender, but he has a will. All of humanity has a will. I believe that's exactly why King Deshret and Nabu Malikata believe that humanity has the potential to become the king of kings, if only the gods were not standing in their way. Your average Joe may not have a will capable of defying an entire world, but they still have their beliefs, and that will be projected onto the world, altering it to some extent. It's literally mind over matter, and it is because humans don't have full control over their willpower that they are slaves to the flesh and the order of this world. The samsara of spiritual evolution described by the Ordo with its 4 cycles, Hyperborea, Atlantean Remuria, and Crownaria, as well as the unnamed second half of the 4th cycle, is about human spiritual evolution and breaking free from the gods. Because if they could do that, everyone would possess a will strong enough to rival an entire world. This is the philosophy of the Ordo around wills, and it is mostly inspired by Eliphas Levi, a French esotericist who created his own theory of magic from concepts that originally belonged to other esotericists. According to him, magic is not only very real, but it is also capable of giving all those who wield it superhuman-like capabilities. This magic is composed of 3 main components: astral light, will, and imagination. Levi included the concept of astral light because he believed in astrology. According to him, the position of the stars during your birth affects your destiny, which in Tevat holds very true as constellations determine the fate of the person they belong to. Interestingly enough, the concept of will, though not limited to descenders, is heavily linked to them. While we don't know how the other 3 descenders found their way into Tevat, we do know that the traveler arrived as a shooting star alongside their twin. Will, like I've already stated, is one's desire, goal, or ambition, and it is brought into being through imagination. Levi believed that the human spirit is endless, because God was the mind of man. And because God was the creator, anything the human mind could imagine could be made manifest in reality. No need for any complex ritual or even prayers. If you could believe it, if you could will it, it would happen. The only condition is that you must not doubt, otherwise the results will be uncertain. Other than that, no exceptions. If your belief or faith was powerful enough, nothing would be impossible to you. It's dream logic, if you will. A few months ago, when Fontaine was released, I made a theory about how I believe that the entirety of Tevat is a reference to Through the Looking Glass, and how all of it is one giant dream. And so far it appears that I might actually be pretty close to the truth. So think about the Sub-Zero's Festival Samsara and how Nilu, being the dream host, had only to wish to have real Patisaras on the stage in order for them to pop into existence. Dream logic. Imagine it and you shall have it. Even if you believe something that is false. In his book, The Law of Psychic Phenomena, Thompson Hudson wrote, "Whether the object of your faith be real or false, you will nevertheless obtain the same effects. Thus, if I believe in St. Peter's statue, as I should have believed in St. Peter himself, I shall obtain the same effects that I should have obtained from St. Peter. But that is superstition. Faith, however, produces miracles. And whether it is true or a false faith, it will always produce the same wonders." Which is interesting because the definition of delusion is a false belief or judgment about external reality. And yet, in Genshin, being delusional does grant you power. And I'm not just talking about the Fatui manufactured delusions, though we will get there. There cannot be more than one truth, and yet everyone seems to experience Tevat differently. Whether that's their delusion or not, it doesn't change the fact that things happen as they expect them to. Lescaut couldn't actually be Thelxie, and yet he was. Because Zuria truly believed that. It was a false faith, but an unwavering one nevertheless. Caterpillar also hinted that if you truly believed you were a god, you would be capable of godly acts of creation. In Narcissus Chris' own words, only the hubris of someone that believes to be above the world can give rise to miracles. And yeah, I'd say this is exactly how the Fatui delusions work. They are powered by the remains of dead gods to allow their wielders to achieve feats that can even surpass those of Allergens. And yet that power does not come for free. Using a delusion can drain your life force, killing you or leaving you in extreme agony. But not in every case. For instance, Tepe managed to use this during a couple of months before his rapid aging caught up to him, and Tartalius had his delusion for perhaps years by now. He's not shy to use it, but it does not seem to be dealing with any negative side effects as of yet. On the other hand, Krippus only used it once before being left in such a sorry state that his own son had to put him out of his misery. So what's the difference here? Well, Krippus was a realist. Tepe was hopeful, Tartaglia is clinically insane and absolutely delusional. Krippus' lifelong dream was to be a knight, but he failed his trials. He considered himself too weak to make it and resigned himself to his fate, accepting that the gods had other plans for him. When Ursa the Drake attacked him in the Luke, Krippus pulled out his delusion not because he believed he was strong enough to defeat the dragon, but because he loved his son and couldn't bear the thought of his life being cut short, especially when he was just now accomplishing everything that had always been out of Krippus' grasp. When he used his delusion, he had no delusions of power and glory. He most likely expected to die, so the delusion had nothing to feed off of, other than his life force. Tepe was something of a middle ground. He had big dreams and ambitions, but he encountered trouble as soon as he got transferred to the front lines and had to be rescued by the Traveler. And even though he got more than just a taste of victory, every time he saw the Traveler, he was reminded of the gaping chasm that separated their power levels. Remember, doubt is the killer of faith, and if you do not have absolute faith, the results of your imagination are less than certain. As for Child, he would fistfight gods and dragons alike any day of the week. He truly wants to defeat the entire world and he believes that he can do it. He has more than enough delusion in him to feed his delusion. It pays to be delusional, apparently. But now you may be wondering, where exactly does all of this leave Reason, and how does it explain why the twin isn't a descender? Reason is the ability to think, to understand the world around you and form logical judgments. It's the opposite of delusion. Reason cuts through delusion. The Holy Blade is said to be able to cut through any will that comes from water, and now life comes from the sea. Which was how the Traveler managed to break through the barrier that Anne raised to keep them, and reality, out of Anapausis. The entirety of this little kingdom was the result of the delusions of the merged consciousness of Mary, Anne, and Lyris. The Traveler was able to force their way in and snap Anne back to reality. They forced her to see reason. And they did so because, according to them, to indulge in delusion like this is dangerous, as it does not leave room for the future. And Eliphas Levi agrees. Yes, you can manifest your delusion into reality, but this magic is not without danger. According to him, and I quote, "The result may be madness for those who are not established on the base of the supreme, absolute, and infallible reason." To him, the usage of delusional magic is a deadly path. So it isn't a surprise that it has such a negative connotation in Genshin as well. The artifact set Flowers of Paradise Lost tells us that the second who came brought with them a tide of delusion, which destroyed the land and spread plagues. To counter this delusion, the Master of the Heavens, Heavenly Principles, sent down the Divine Nails. We now know that these nails combat forbidden knowledge, which is just a form of abyssal energy. So delusion must be associated with the abyss, which honestly makes perfect sense. We know that Elena's consciousness existed in the abyss prior to his birth, and that him and Durin both, having been created by Rhine daughter, and most likely both having abyssal origins, had a very skewed and delusional view of the world. Where they thought that they were making friends and having fun, they were actually leaving only destruction and death in their wake. Perhaps the Melusines only see the world in the peculiar way they do because, having been born from Elena's, they are also of abyssal origin. The Abyss Order also attempted to corrupt the Valen's mind and make him delusional through Durin's corrupted blood. But perhaps no one was quite as delusional as the Conrians. Levi claims that using delusional magic was the reason why sorcerers always ended up being strangled by the devils they turned to for power, and while Conria turned to the Abyss and its delusional power to defy the gods, it eventually backfired. But not before a certain summoning could occur. According to the Wanderer, the Underground Nation was the first stop of the Twin in Tevat, and that only happened because they were summoned by the heavens, whatever that may mean. The twins probably crashed into Tevat in different places, which would explain why the Abyss Twin never bothered to wake the Traveler up. They likely didn't know where they were. And if I had to guess, I'd say the Traveler probably landed in Starfell Lake, the same place where they awakened from their Sustainer-imposed imprisonment over 500 years later. It might just have been their impact that formed the lake. Regardless, the Abyss Twin has never been considered a descender by Irminsul since the beginning of their journey was recorded. The Traveler proposes two scenarios to explain this. Number 1, their memories are wrong. Perhaps they never traveled other worlds together. Maybe they are not twins at all. Number 2, this world did something to the twin. Personally, I'm leaning towards number 2, and so is Nicole. And the reason is quite simple. The Abyss Twin can manipulate abyssal energy, which is associated with delusions. Delusions and reason are, by definition, incompatible with each other. I believe that is why the Traveler cannot use portals and rifts to get to the Abyss unlike their sibling, because they are reason, and just like a sword, they cut right through the delusion. By that same logic, the Abyss Twin cannot use reason, and is therefore not a descender. But that raises yet another question. The only creatures Irminsul seems to be unable to record are descenders, and the only traits that seem to set them apart from everyone else are the fact that they hail from a different world and can hold reason. Simply being from a different world doesn't stop them from being recorded though, so really the only real reason why Irminsul can see the Traveler is reason. That must mean that Irminsul is incompatible with reason, right? Because even though abyssal energy is so destructive to it that Rukkhadevata had to sacrifice herself to purge it out of the tree, it can still record individuals that wield this energy. So reason has to be even more incompatible with it. Which puts me in mind of Nicole's very weird word choice when she first talked to the Traveler after Scaramouche had erased himself from Irminsul. She said,
"History does not change easily, but human hearts can. Believe your own eyes. Only that which you see is true. What is unseen is but an illusion."
But then, Kater once said, people cannot perceive the truth because a body with a self sees the world filtered through the 5 senses. And we just saw that that is true. Everyone seems to see Tevat differently, and Irminsul is capable of physically altering the world. The Traveler saw with their own eyes that the story the 2 researchers were writing about the Kabukimono changed to not include him at all. So how can they trust what they see? But they are a witness, after all. The witness. The Traveler doesn't simply see what is in front of them at any given moment, oh no! They also saw the change even when nobody else could. Even they believe that Nicole was referring to their memories. Because they hold reason, they can see right through illusions and delusions. If you think about it, all the cutscenes where they use reason were about dispelling delusions. Osael was delusional because he actually believed he could rise to power millennia after the end of the Archon War. A had a completely delusional view of eternity. She was literally closing herself off from the real world so she wouldn't have to face reality. And Scaramouche fancied himself a god. So, if the Traveler can see through the changes in Irminsul, which seems to be so incompatible with reason that it cannot record all those wielded, should that not mean that Irminsul's changes, and by extension all of Tevat, are delusions? And since Celestia either created Irminsul or seems to at least be able to carve fate into it, what does this all mean for heavenly principles? What if they aren't gods at all? But that is a question for part 2. I'm sorry, I hate doing this, but there is just so much to go over that cramming it all up into one video would probably give everyone indigestion. So have the appetizers first, I guess. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Challenging such an old and sound theory is kinda scary, not gonna lie. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe and share the video because it helps a ton. That's all for today. My name is Blue, and I'll see you again soon. Safe journey, travelers!